if I don't see myself as a psychologist, this adult who's tough, but if I see myself in my more wounded form and vulnerable form, then I can have more compassion.
Welcome to The One You Feed. Thanks for joining us. Our guest on this episode is Dr. Radhule Weininger. She's a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and meditation teacher. She also leads meditation groups in Santa Barbara and retreats globally. Radhule is the author of 2 books, including the one discussed here, Heart Medicine: How to Stop Painful Patterns and Find Peace and Freedom.
Hi, Radhule. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. We're going to be discussing your book, which is called Heart Medicine: How to Stop Painful Patterns and Find Peace and Freedom at Last. But before we do that, we'll start like we always do with the parable. In the parable, there is a grandparent who's talking with their grandchild, and they say, in life, there are 2 wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love. And the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandchild stops and thinks about it for a second and looks up at their grandparent and says, well, which one wins? And the grandparent says, the one you feed. So I'd like to start off by asking you what that parable means to you in your life and in the work that you do.
Thank you for bringing this parable. It's actually one of my favorites, and I use it quite a bit in teaching now and then because it's so apropos to always where we are, but also where we are today. And it means that we have a choice. That is, we all have, as I say in my book, LURPs, we all have long-standing, recurrent, painful patterns. We all meet triggers. The world isn't easy. And we have a bit of a choice on how to respond. And we can respond with kindness and patience and wisdom and compassion, or we can react in an angry way or selfish way or greedy way or impatient way, or just putting our heads in the sand. So I think that is what it means. It's like we do have actually some power to see where our life goes. I know Jack Kornfield said once, he paraphrased an old Chinese proverb that says, intention leads to behavior. Behaviors create habits. Habits have something to do with our personality, and our personality has something to do with our destiny. Which is in a way a similar way to talk to the 2 wolves.
So the heart of your book talks about these, as you said, LURPs, long-standing, recurrent, painful patterns of hurt, which I'm pretty sure any One You Feed listener hears that and goes, oh yeah, okay, all right, I've got those. So, but let's explore them a little bit more. What are these things, these LURPs?
Well, I think these are knots in our psyche, old wounds that are basically becoming calloused, and they become these knots of behaviors, of memories, of thoughts, of feelings, of body symptoms, sometimes of events. And they have been talked about in the West by Jung and by Freud as complexes. Mm-hmm. And in the East, they are called samskaras, or in Pali, sankaras. And the only difference is that in the West, they are usually seen as originating in our childhood. Mm-hmm. And in the East, they are seen as passing through lifetimes. And, it doesn't really matter. It just matters we know that they're old. They're old and they are reoccurring. And this thing about LURPs is that they are like patterns of relating, their dynamics that reoccur. And so we often come to a place where we say, why this again? Doesn't this feel similar, even though these are completely different people or completely different circumstances? And then at times we feel like sitting ducks to our own old painful patterns.
You say at the heart of a LERP is a term that's used a lot more in modern day use, which is that there's a trauma at the heart of a lot of these, whether we're talking about a capital T or lowercase t trauma, that's where these originate.
Yeah, that's right. And when you say lowercase t or uppercase t, I imagine that you mean with uppercase T something huge happening, like a war or an earthquake, or our house burns down, or somebody dies, or we get abused really badly. And lowercase t are more these micro traumas. Let's say an atmosphere in the house. Maybe a way we were neglected, kind of in a subtle way. Like I fed and clothed you, but maybe we never got the right attention. Or we were pushed in a certain way, or there was huge competition with our siblings, or we felt really misunderstood. So these are probably more the lowercase t's, is that right?
Yeah, that's precisely what I mean. Yep. So, one of the things I loved in the book was, first, how much you shared your own experience with these. And then secondly, how clear you made it that this is not a quick fix situation, right? Like these things don't go away quickly. You talk about how Native Americans knew for thousands of years that forests and grasslands, had to be tended over a long period of time. And you say with this work, there's no shortcuts, only diligent, careful tending. We've got to work with these things thoroughly, persistently, and with loving care. And I think that's so important because I think we get very frustrated on our healing journey when it doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, unfortunately, our society primes us for that. We are kind of in this consumer society where we want quick fixes, quick pleasures. And I think especially pharmacology leads us in that direction. Take this pill and that pill and this intervention and you're just fine. And so I think our frustration tolerance or our ability to suffer with ourselves has to be built up again. To see ourselves with compassion and understanding and patience.
So looking at your own life, did you, where do you think your LERPs came from, or some of them? I mean, I suppose we all could probably list a handful of them, but...
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's how it started. My mentor is Jack Kornfield. And for over 20 years, and we talked about, he's a psychologist and meditation teacher. So we talked a lot about it. He really encouraged me to work with this and on this and write about it. And my LERPs came from my mom. I grew up in post-war Germany, and my mother had me out of wedlock. She was quite traumatized by the war herself, where she was a young medical student, medic on the East Front, and her fiancé died. And so she had came from a Catholic family, and so she had a baby with another doctor, and which was in Bavaria, 1957, very shameful. It was kind of unheard of. And so she hid me in an orphanage for 2 years. And then presented me to her family as adopted, which I guess was a little bit more face-saving than having a child without being married. And And then she was always very busy. As a doctor, I was having, luckily, a very nice nanny from when I was 2 to 4. But then we moved to my aunt's house. So I think the first one was abandonment. And and kind of maybe a sense of rejection. So I think that I notice is always a really tender point for me when I feel excluded and kind of rejected. And I think that was even more than in the family, because they treated me a little strange. They didn't quite know where I was coming from, and there were all these stories, and it wasn't quite clear, and there was a lot of shame and embarrassment. And so that sense has stayed with me, when I don't feel quite accepted, or what maybe others can let roll off their backs more easily, was just for me really a trigger, and brought up a big inner reaction. So
yeah, I can only imagine too what the collective society in post-war Germany was like.
Yeah.
Post-war America was like, yay, right? It's a period of prosperity and everybody's happy, and we think of it here as this grand time in America. But I mean, I'm sure your experience there is so radically different. I mean, Germany was just destroyed.
Right, and deeply ashamed and guilty and in denial, and so even though my grandfather, he was a historian, and he himself was prosecuted by the Nazis for speaking up, but there was still, they were refugees from what is Poland now, and so they had come with supposedly 3 pairs of clothes and an old pot. And so, and my grandparents were in this refugee resettlement camp for a few years. So, yeah, there was lots of shame and poverty, and then having on top of all a kid born out of wedlock for refugees. I feel very much for refugees nowadays, when I hear about how many Ukrainians are resettled, and South and Middle Americans and are losing their homes. It's like, I just can only imagine what that must feel like, and how many LERPs those poor kids will have.
It's a little overwhelming sometimes as we get to know more about trauma and how it affects people, and then you see so much of it in the world. And we know how it just carries on and it gets passed on, and it certainly in my less hopeful moments, I feel very deeply overwhelmed by it. Very like feeling like we're caught in this cycle.
Yeah, and I think our LERPs, our long-standing painful patterns from our childhood, get brought up by new difficult environments. War definitely brings up something for me, and maybe for other families too. And so I think this is a highly triggering outside environment for all of us. And depending on what we experienced when we were little, or maybe in past lives, whoever knows, things are getting inflamed again. And yeah, there is a question how to respond. And I think the response has to be both psychological and spiritual.
Yeah. Yep. And, 2 of your main mentors, I've had the great privilege of speaking with both of them in the last few months for this show, Jack Kornfield and Joanna Macy. And,
yeah.
Joanna Macy's work is, very focused on being able to feel the heartbreak of the world and yet remain resilient in face of that. So let's turn back to LERPs a little bit, and I want to talk about, I just sort of cast the dark side of LERPs there, but you say that they also have the potential to help us find meaning and amazingly to discover the very purpose of our lives. Say a little bit more about how meaning and purpose are embedded in these things.
Yes, the first noble truth by the Buddha is the truth of suffering. And that also can bring awareness. It's kind of a bit of a wake-up call. Like I had to come to a place where I had, in my early 20s, a stomach ulcer and 2 car accidents. Actually, I was 2 months in the hospital. And that led me to go to Sri Lanka. I went with my boyfriend 1980 to Sri Lanka and ended up in a monastery there. And looking back, in some ways, I'm grateful that I, in a way, hit the wall or, let's say, my windshield. And because I wouldn't have stopped and really had to evaluate my life, feel deeply what wasn't right, and actually look for meaning and purpose. So in some ways, this has become a doorway, and I think Pema Chodron says it so beautifully, when pain is the doorway, no? And I think it's too hard to see that in the moment. If something terrible happens to somebody, you can't just say, see, this is a doorway. They would feel misunderstood, or, it feels like a narcissistic wounding, as we call it in psychotherapy. But maybe later in hindsight, we say, in a way, this was a wake-up call, and that gave me a chance to reorient my life.
I basically burnt my life to the ground at the age of 24 with heroin addiction. And I'm grateful for that because I was forced at that age. People are often like, well, how did you get into being interested in all this stuff? And I'm like, well, I kind of, I was forced into it in a really, in a strong way. And that always, I feel grateful in many ways for me that it was that bad that quick. It gave me more. It's given me more of my adult life to work on healing.
Exactly. I was 22.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I'm glad it happened early.
When you talk about that doorway, there's that old saying, when one door closes, another door opens, which I think speaks to kind of what we're talking about, like that, we can walk through these things. But the thing about that little saying, which it's a nice little saying and it's true, but is that, often nobody talks about what seems to me to be a long, dark hallway. Like one door closes doesn't mean the other door opens right up. Very often you're like, well, now I'm in the dark, and we're there for a while, and we have to kind of just keep walking. And then another door opens and we go, oh, I see. All right. This makes sense now. But that dark hallway is part of the journey. I want to hit one other piece of LERPs here before we move into healing them. And I want to talk about psychology and, actually back up, strike that, Chris. I want to talk about, why do we obsess and repeat, right? There's a part of LERPs that is this obsessive rumination, chewing over we just going through the same thing again and again. What's happening there?
Yeah, Freud, good old Freud, called it repetition compulsion. There is this attempt in us to, I think there are different opinions why that is. One is it's just becoming a habit, basically, to repeat. If you look at it more positively, and I'm also maybe drawn to see it more positively. It's like we want to jump over the hurdle. We repeat it because there must be a way through. There must be a way through. There must be a way through. So it's maybe both. There's a habitual piece, and then there must be a way through or over this. And but it's quite heartbreaking at times how we do things again and again and again and get stuck in such a rut. And sometimes the pain can become, actually sometimes these Freudians have such good words. It can become a pain mama. The pain becomes the familiar thing. It's like, and if we don't know peace, then pain is maybe the only thing we have.
As we turn towards healing here, you say that awareness practice is fundamental to working with all forms of these LERPs. Say more about why awareness is so fundamental and what you mean by awareness in that context.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I mean by awareness is that we look back at ourselves and we say, that's what's going on, rather than just distracting ourselves or putting our head in the sand or turning to addiction or TV or our devices or whatever we have to not be there. And I think that's basically what awareness is. There's self-awareness, being aware of what's going on in ourselves. There's metacognitive awareness, which is really noticing the processes in our heart and mind. And then there's awareness of our environment. And then there is the moment by moment, non-judgmental attention that John Kabat-Zinn talks about. And then I see sometimes awareness as, like the Tibetans do, as a field quality, as something that is already there, that is always here. The field quality of awareness we can tap into, the groundless ground of being. And in the last maybe 5-10 years, I find that actually more and more important because it gives us a wider perspective.
Life can be overwhelming. Racing thoughts, endless decisions, and that feeling of being stuck in a loop of fear, anxiety, or indecision. But what if you had some simple, actionable tools to help you find clarity and calm, even in the toughest moments? And that's exactly what Wise Habits is here to offer. It's a 6-week program designed to help you navigate life's challenges with a greater sense of ease and confidence. This isn't about adding more to your to-do list or chasing perfection, because who needs either of those things? It's about integrating small, meaningful practices into your daily life that help you feel more present, connected, and in control. Through weekly workshops that I lead, supportive small group connections, and daily nudges to help you keep grounded, Wise Habits meets you where you are and helps you build a life that feels lighter, more intentional, and aligned with what matters most. Hundreds of people have been through this program in the past and loved it. Enrollment is open now, and the next group begins February 2nd. Don't wait to take the first step towards a life that feels calmer and more in tune with who you want to be. Visit oneyoufeed.net/wisehabits to join today, because little by little, a little becomes a lot. Visit oneyoufeed.net/wisehabits to join today. What you're pointing at there is this idea of there being two types of healing, and I'm putting words on things that don't quite fit, but we'll run with it. And the one would be psychological healing, right?
Yeah.
It's going back and looking at what happened to us specifically, understanding what that causes us to do, processing that, unwinding it, but it's very personal. It's very specific to me and my thing. And then there's another type of healing, spiritual healing, that makes me think of something that Marvin Gaye talked about, which was a different type of healing, but that is not what this show is about. That may not be a reference you get, but some of the listeners will anyway. but spiritual healing. And what you're talking about there is connecting to something that is bigger than us, that is
Right.
non-personal in a sense. It's not about me and my stories. And you just mentioned that over the last 5 years or so for you, that second part has become more and more important. And I'm curious if you have an opinion on whether the psychological healing that you did before that made that spiritual healing easier to do. Did it have to happen in a certain order? Did you pursue them, I think to some degree, in parallel? What are your thoughts on how those two work together and how those two work together?
Yeah. I have actually, I'm thinking about that a lot because, I'm trained as a psychologist. And actually in my early 20s, with these car accidents, I started psychotherapy, which was unusual in Germany in 1980 or 79. And I also started meditation, which also was very unusual there. My relatives thought I had entered a cult. They thought it was basically dangerous. And I think they go hand in hand. For a long time, it was probably until the 90s, I felt there were like two camps. When I started my PhD, after I got my MD in Germany, I got my PhD in America at CIS. But my more psychoanalytic supervisors thought that my spiritual path, and I always went to retreats all the time whenever I could, was basically an escape. Like they called it like an oceanic merger or something strange. And I couldn't basically talk about it. While many of my early spiritual friends thought that psychology was a waste of time. You should just be spiritual. And it was really Jack, who I met in 86, but maybe it was a bit later that he said that, like that they actually fit together. And he gave me permission to bring those together for myself and in my work. But I always had the sense that they fit together. There was just no platform for that. There was no conceptual framework for that. And I was trained as a therapist not to talk about spirituality. So whenever I did, I felt I had to not tell my supervisors or I had to kind of hide it. And it was actually Jack in the early 2000s who asked me, do you meditate with your clients? And I said, no, boundaries and transference, countertransference, this and that. And he said, Radhule, get over it. And so he really gave me permission. And since then, I have gotten big time over it. And, time has moved with me to a degree that now insurance companies pay for it. So it's really wild how times have changed. And I do think they so fit together. I think our spiritual healing, and it doesn't have to be religious, but spiritual in a sense that there is something bigger that holds us too, that has meaning and that is there. And I remember at one long retreat, it was actually a solo retreat, but I had Jack over Skype every few days. And I asked Jack, is the universe personal or impersonal? And he said, And then he said, I think it's both. And I said, that's what I thought too. And it's the great mystery, like the Native Americans call it the great mystery. We just can't wrap our mind around it. It's certainly not a person, or it's not anthropomorphic, and I'm quite happy to say I just can't wrap my mind around it, but I can feel it.
I think the answer to many questions is both.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of a both person with a lot of these things that seem like they are delineated. They're closer together than we often think. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking recently about the different topic, but well, similar topic. We talk about thought and emotion, and we separate them, right?
Yeah.
But I've started more and more to go, well, how we could talk about them as if they're separate in some way, and there's some ways we could point to them being separate, but they never seem to be without each other. They seem to co-arise. So, you know, are they more the same thing? Are they more one thing than we think? You know, are they? It's there's certainly a deep interconnection and co-arising between them.
There is. And then with body too.
Yeah.
You know, body is also co-rising with emotions. Maybe the difference is thoughts, just in their pure form, don't have so many physical residues, but emotions do.
Yeah.
And, you know, we feel them in our bodies as a tightness in the chest or a knot in the stomach or hot or cold or whatever it is. So the co-rising is just the right word. And it's just how can we hold them? And I guess if we have this wider perspective, you know, if there is the sense of awareness, also having a field quality, there's this spaciousness that's bigger and that holds us all, in which we are all interdependent and co-rising. Like Joanna says, you know, Joanna, who actually was this morning at our meditation.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, she's there many mornings. And so she says that everything is co-rising and interdependent. And that interdependence then brings compassion.
So let's move a little bit into your program of healing. You've got 12 steps of healing, and these are not to be confused with the 12 steps of, say, AA or a 12-step program. These are different 12 steps. And we're not going to make our way through all 12 of them, but I thought we might, thought I might hit a couple of them if that's, pick a couple out if that's okay. So, I mean, the first one is to recognize, that you're having, recognize what your LRPP or your LRP is. And you have 12 different things that might be a clue to us. Mm-hmm. Can you just mention what a couple of those are?
Yeah, the first one is that we feel it in our bodies. Something hits us, or we feel winded, or suddenly our head hurts, or we feel a tightness in our jaw or our chest, or hot or cold, or something happens and it's like, oh wow, I don't feel right. And then often there is an emotion that's bigger than the situation would warrant it or would be expected. Why does it spend me so out of shape?
Yeah.
Somebody disinvited me from their book club. Why is that such a big deal?
And now I'm going to burn this city to the ground.
Right, exactly. And then rumination. You talked about rumination. Our mind spins. We wake up at night between 3 and 4, and the mind just goes and can't stop. We can't fall back asleep or early in the morning. Or maybe we feel a sense of, like post-traumatic stress symptoms, like a sense of unreality, or maybe a bit of tunnel feeling, or a bit of dissociation, or something like that may happen, or a generalization. We feel, oh wow, it was just the book club that rejected me, but now I feel the world is against me. You know, we generalize out from the book club to the world. So these are a few of those.
Yeah, one of them you mentioned, and you sort of hit it there, is this narrowing awareness, and that's probably the one for me, because my mode of you know being of a LERP coming up is shut down. It's just the power down. You know, my awareness just shrinks till it's just like, you know, not just me sitting, you know, sort of immobilized. Luckily, that rarely happens to that degree anymore. But I can remember many experiences where, like, it would happen, and that was the thing for me, was just this almost complete sort of shutdown.
Shutdown, right? And it shuts itself down. You know, we don't even say, "Okay, now I'm shutting down." It just happens.
That's yes, that's
and
exactly.
that is so insidious,
it.
No?
Yeah, I often think of to that insidious nature of it. I often think about, and this is particularly poignant for me right now. I'm going to see my dad this weekend. My dad has Alzheimer's, and he's declining quickly, and we never had a great relationship. And I would periodically throughout my adult life, I would be like, all right, I'm going to play golf today with my dad, and I'm gonna dive under the surface with him, right? I'm going to make a deeper connection with him. and I would get in his presence, and all of a sudden that desire would just vanish.
Oh, yeah.
And so it wasn't even like I was consciously choosing, like, oh, I'm afraid to do this. This feels too risky. It was like all that desire to do it just gone. And it was, like you said, it was so insidious, because I thought, oh, I guess I don't really want it. And I was like, no, I don't, with some more reflection, I was like, oh, well, that's not actually what's happening here, right? The situation is triggering a shutdown process that happens completely unconsciously.
Yeah, it is. It's very unconscious, and we have to be really patient with ourselves. And, besides mindfulness as the next step, noticing our feelings and thoughts and body symptoms and being aware of them, there's self-compassion. Because I think first when we see. And sometimes it's too much. Oh, I didn't want to see all of that, so how shut down I am, or how bent out of shape I am, or how great my craving is, or whatever, so how rejected and ashamed I feel. And so I think we need this, I call it a psychospiritual container of mindfulness and compassion and, patience with ourselves and really a lot of kindness.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about practicing self-compassion, because I think it's something that more and more everybody is aware is probably a good idea, and is really, really difficult for some people. You actually describe a situation in the book that happened early in the pandemic, where you sort of spiraled into a LERP, and you were finding it hard to give yourself self-compassion. Can you talk about how you found your way through that?
Oh, with my ex-husband?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I felt really triggered because, we always, even though we get along really well, there's this thing about the kids. Where do the kids live? And which actually I hear a lot of people can understand well and identify with. And then I felt just again overlooked and not heard and not recognized and kind of frustrated with myself that I couldn't get with it better. Why can't I just let it go, And so noticing my own LERP, why this was hitting me so badly, and also his LERP. He comes from a similarly wounded family to mine. And I think that's often with our partners. I think some smart psychologist said we are meeting often people on a similar level of development or not development. So we meet others that are also having their lerps. They are then our exes, and we have to share our kids with them. And so it needs a lot of compassion to hold this, to find our way through.
Yeah. So I assume for you, some of what's happening in that moment is you've got all these things happening. And as you said, there's a little bit of, why can't I let this go? Right. Like
Right.
I'm a psychologist. I'm writing a book. I'm a mindfulness teacher. Like, what's the matter with you? So, and I think anybody, who's been working with these things for a while is going to have some flavor of that, right? Some flavor of, I know the answer here. I interviewed the poet David White yesterday, and he had a line that just really hit me. And he said, heartbreak is when we're called to let go and can't. And I thought, oh my goodness, like that just really landed for me.
That is good.
Yeah. So you're in this place where you feel like I should be doing better, but I'm obviously not. So how do you find self-compassion for yourself there?
With experience. I think it becomes almost like a new pathway, a new habit. I think once we are able to have it once or twice or 3 times, it's more possible again to do that. And sometimes remembering the little kid I was, the isolation and the not self-pity, but self-empathy. And that also, if I don't see myself as a psychologist, this adult who's tough, but if I see myself in my more wounded form and vulnerable form, then I can have more compassion.
Yeah, and you have practices in the book for this. You've got a few that you use specifically for self-compassion, and I wonder if you could share a little bit about, one of the practices. There were 3 that sort of jumped out to me. There was recognizing ourselves practice, understanding our suffering practice, or the good enough parent practice. So I'll let you pick any of those 3, but just tell us, pick one and tell us a little bit about what it is or how you do it.
Right. So I think really allowing yourself to get into a relaxed place, to allow yourself to feel your body, your breath, and especially to recognize in your body where you feel raw and where you feel vulnerable. It's like maybe even put your hand on your heart, and they found out this has actually a physiological effect to do that. And then in your mind's eye, bring to mind this feeling that you might have of rejection, or maybe of being left out or missing out, or whatever it is. And to feel, where is this? Maybe it is in my heart, going right through to my back, and to stay with that felt sense. And then maybe having an image come up from a time when we were small, where we felt that sense of heartache, maybe a rawness, a tightness in the heart, in the back, all the way through where that was, maybe a bit of nausea in the stomach, maybe a little bit of lightheadedness, and bring in this child, that exile, as they call it now in internal family systems, bring in the exile and give them your love, your attention, your kindness, and feel with them, and maybe even feel what it felt like for them physically. It's kind of unexile the exile. Make them your kin again, your internal kin. And really feel that in your body. And maybe there will be some compassion. Maybe there will be some forgiveness. Sometimes we have to forgive ourselves for being in the wrong time, in the wrong place, or whatever happened. And then really staying in connection with the breath, breathing through it all, and coming back to body and breath with self-acceptance.
As I read your book and I look at the practices, there's a part of me, having done 400 of these interviews, where I look at them and I go, okay, well, this is, I've seen a lot of this before, right? I really think, though, that the way that you sort of combine the spiritual and the psychological is really well done. Like there really is, within these practices, many of them actually sort of, there is, instead of talking about the two being complementary, there actually is a commingling of them. The good enough parent practice being, sort of an example of that, or the understanding our suffering practice. There's mindfulness, there's awareness, and there's current moment awareness and mindfulness, and there's bringing some of the psychological things into that. And I think that container is interesting. You use the word psycho-spiritual container, which is, it's one thing to sit in, say, our therapist's office and talk about a certain thing. And it's a different thing to do it when we're in a slightly different state of mind, one where we have relaxed the body, where we have dropped deeper into our awareness, which is what a lot of your practices are calling us to do. They're sort of centering us, dropping us in, and then allowing us to try and process some of those things from that place.
Exactly. And I think that's something I'm becoming more and more cognizant and aware of, that this wider perspective is really helpful. And the wider spiritual container. And I think some people are catching on to that, like Richard Schwartz from IFS. How the big self is really helpful, especially with personal woundings. I just saw that a few weeks ago and I thought, wow, he's coming to a similar place as...
Very much so.
I didn't even know, so I think now we have permission to bring the psychological and the spiritual together. And soon insurance companies will even pay for it. No, it's like time is moving on, probably with the urgency of the times. We need it. We need the strengthening of the holding container. Just the psychological is not enough. And I feel maybe what helped me is that I kind of intuitively knew that all along. Since 1980, I felt I had to do it in secret. Yeah. Because my spiritual teachers or my therapists didn't know, and they were in different camps. And now we are becoming one camp, and which is so beautiful. And that is what our world needs. And to have this camp without card membership. We don't have to be Christians or Jews or Muslims we can be, but maybe we can also be more than that, or we can be neither of it.
Well, I certainly think we have way more options on the table for us, and which is in many ways a very good thing, as you've described. And yet I'm also struck by looking at some of the practices in the book that you've got. And again, these are awareness, mindfulness practices. recognizing that word practice is really important, that
Yeah.
like you're able to do some of these things because you have developed some mindfulness, some stability, some, there is a doing these things multiple times sort of thing. I think we have a tendency. I certainly have had one over the years. I think I've gotten better at it, and I've learned. But it used to be like pick up a book, read it, because I'm like, okay, finally, I've got something that's going to fix me. And I read the book, and it says do this practice, and I half-heartedly do it while I read the book, and then I go, that didn't do anything. And I set it aside, and I go, well, all right, what's next? Versus really realizing that this is deep work, that, as you said, and I quoted kind of very, very early on, is, we have to do it thoroughly and persistently, and cannot be in a hurry.
Yeah, and there is do you know this quote by Jack Kornfield? The miraculous to happen is an accident, but practice makes us accident prone.
Yeah, yep.
I think that's so true. I think practice makes us accident prone.
Yeah.
And it kind of keeps a channel open, not only to our own heart, but also to the great heart of the world.
So what would you say to someone who is feeling, like they've been working on this stuff for a while, and they still feel like, I get just all wrapped up in my lerps, I'm been doing this stuff for 30 years, and I still just feel like stuck. What sort of words of wisdom would you have for people who are kind of in that place?
Well, I would say, I know the feeling. Just recently at a retreat, it happened to me. I was at this 4-week retreat in Spirit Walk, and I did actually a little Dzogchen thing with 2 other teachers, and during the 4-week retreat. And then when I came, the other people I was doing that with, they were doing this together for a long time. They said, oh, we don't know if we want you in our group. And for 2 days, I didn't hear anything from them. And it really lerped me, because Spirit Walk had been the place of working through lerps for me. And I thought, here I am with my lerp. It really helped to find out that my lerp was still well and alive, but that I noticed it. And then after 2 days, they said, oh, it's all fine. We just do this together, and everything puffed away, all the stress. And I actually thought, isn't this interesting? Usually I would have been chewing on my lerp for probably 2 to 3 weeks. And now it was 2 days where it passed, and it just puffed away. So I would say it will still come up, but it will pass maybe a little quicker.
Yeah. The thing I often think about is, what would I be like had I not done so many of the things that I've done? So it's very easy to habituate to what my current state of mind is and be like, okay, well, but then to look at like, how far in some ways, we've all come. And I think that's an important part of the journey, is to sometimes reflect and go, oh, geez, I'm still, I'm not free from suffering, because you know what, I'm human. So of course I'm not going to be, but it's not like this work hasn't borne a lot of fruit.
Yeah,
it's just not perfection, because sometimes we get sold, or we want, we all naturally want a pain-free life.
That is right. And in a way, marketing and advertisement pushes us to that, to not be terribly modest and, to kind of overstate ourselves. And, so I think that's unfortunately part of even here in our psycho-spiritual community, we are definitely not free from that.
Totally.
And there's a big challenge to our authenticity, no? And our humility. It's like, if you're too humble, you won't be anybody. But then we don't want to be anybody because there's no self. Well, where do we go, right? And so it's a tough one. And to just again, maybe be compassionate with our human condition. And we are always teetering between the personal and the universal reality.
Yeah.
We have to get our driver's license renewed, and also at times we are really at one with the universe.
Yep. Yeah, I think, when I think of Jack Kornfield, I think more than anything else, I think of the phrase that he's used so many times. It's not his phrase, but he's used it so many times that I associate it with him, is the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. And that for me is just, that is one of the most grounding ideas for me, because whichever side of that I'm on, I go, oh, okay, yeah, normal, and if I'm on the 10,000 sorrow side, I go, okay, that's normal. And, there's some joys coming around the corner because, and if I'm on the joy side, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up with sharing a little bit more about step 11, which is letting in the mystery. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but I
would love to.
It's always a great place to go. So I'll just, I'll hand it over to you with no specific question there, so much as, talk about the role of letting in the mystery in this healing process.
It's really coming to the experiential place that the mystery is here, that it's more than a thought. It's more than a concept. And I think there are practices like the Tibetan pointing out practices that allow us to get to this place. Or I think Locke Kelly does it these days in a more accessible way. And actually, that's kind of how I teach these days. Because I think it's so important to feel to experience physically and energetically the great interconnected beingness of us all. And to feel that awareness can sink from my prefrontal cortex into my heart, into life around me. And that inside and outside is actually not that different. And that they are interconnected, and that I can see, even be mindful from that greater perspective. And it's quite interesting. It's in a way like being in a flow state. We can actually be very alive and very aware and very attentive from this place. It's not being spacey. It's actually being hyper aware, yet relaxed at the same time and connected. And I find that is for me one aspect of the great mystery. And we can connect it however we want, through our heart. When we're really in our heart, we feel this complete openness. Love is really probably the main entry point to the great mystery. But then, if there are prayers we have from our childhood, from whatever religious upbringing we have, that is fine to bring them in. Often in the beginning of a practice, mindfulness or effortless mindfulness practice, I start with a heart opening. And not just because I think it's a good thing, but also because it calms our mind, it calms our whole system down. It's like a little child that is afraid. And when its mother holds it and comforts it, then it feels secure. And then the ruminating, busy mind calms down. And so then our heart becomes like the doorway to the great mystery. And it actually was Henry Miller who at Epidaurus in Greece say, when my little heart beats in unison with the great heart of the world. It's a beautiful quote. And I think that's like to speak with Joanna Macy. That's when we can be in touch with the great mystery and come to engagement for our world. Then, because part of the great mystery is compassion, is love. And I think Ram Dass was one who was really telling us that. It's like you swim in God, you swim in love. And I think with that love, we can hold our lures. Then with that love, we can be patient with our lures. With that love, we have enough space.
Well, I think that is an absolutely beautiful and perfect place to wrap up. So thank you so much for coming on the show and spending time with us. I really enjoyed the book. I think there's a lot of great practices. The practices are available. I believe if you get the book, you get a link to all the practices as guided meditations.
Yeah.
And we'll have a link in the show notes to where people can buy the book and also to your website and all that stuff.
Yeah. And, you can even have the practices without the book.
Okay.
Maybe I'm not a good salesperson, but on my website, you can find them, and you can find them on the Shambhala website. And I teach every morning, 7:30 to 8. And you just come in through mindfulheartprograms.org, and it's free. I'm quite stubborn to not put a price on the meditations. We have a few other great teachers. So anytime, join us.
I assume that's Pacific time, 7:30 Pacific time?
Yeah, it's Pacific time. And Monday night, 7:15. And Monday mornings, we have a wonderful meditation at 10 o'clock in the morning. And actually, a lot of Europeans are joining us to that one. So here's our other visitor, the cat.
Ah, yes. Okay, we've had the dog and the cat in your lap. All right.
It was really a wonderful interview, and thank you so much for your wonderful presence.
Oh, thank you.
If what you just heard was helpful to you, please consider making a monthly donation to support the One You Feed podcast. When you join our membership community with this monthly pledge, you get lots of exclusive members-only benefits. It's our way of saying thank you for your support. Now, we are so grateful for the members of our community. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without their support, and we don't take a single dollar for granted. To learn more, make a donation at any level, and become a member of the One You Feed community, go to oneyoufeed.net/join. The One You Feed podcast would like to sincerely thank our sponsors for supporting the show.